Today, the tricky subject of death and how parents can best talk to their children about it when someone they know dies or is dying. Whether it's a close family member, a parent or a grandparent, or even someone they don't personally know, like a famous person who's died. Children experience death and parents will be asked about it. But what's the right thing to say, especially at a time when a parent may be going through their own grief? Benjamin Jensen is a grief counsellor at Skylight Trust, an organisation that helps families dealing with grief. Thanks very much for being with us, Benjamin. Good morning.
Kia ora, thank you very much for having me.
So, many scenarios in which this might occur, but straight off the bat, for young children who've not through any other way had a first up, close-up experience of what death is, where do you begin? Talk us through some of your key points.
Yeah, so I suppose it kind of depends a bit on how young we're talking. So generally their experience will be, if they are not verbal at that stage, it's going to be very in the body. So you're going to be noticing, that they're going to be very potentially having like stomach pains or crying a lot and that kind of clingy behaviour. And so in responding, that's going to be more of that physical comfort, and also depending on when they get a bit older and they start to understand, you might start to use more language as you go to describe what's going on for them. And throughout, I'm kind of like always advocate and ask that we weave in simple language when we're talking to our tamariki. And so it needs to be age appropriate, obviously. And what does that mean? Well, would kind of be words that they understand, and specifically when you're talking about death and dying, we tend to recommend using those words. It is okay if a bit older they start to understand words like pass away or gone to the other side, if they understand that at an older age. But at a younger age, we just want to make sure it's as simple to understand as possible and as least confusing as possible.
When do children first have, just generally speaking, any concept of death?
Yeah, I think so. It's dependent on the child, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of different ways they get exposed to it. Generally, the more exposure they have to the concept of death, the sooner they might understand it, but they might not grapple with the permanence of death until potentially some as early as 4, but generally 4 to 6, sometimes a bit longer. It just depends on those conversations happening at home. And even still, they may still be at about 6 asking lots of questions about it. They're trying to understand and interpret what death is, what it means. And that can be actually quite tricky for whānau, because they'll find that they having to answer the question again and again. What is death? How long does someone die for? And so, it can be, very dependent based on that.
So for a young child, and there's different ages we're talking about already, but we're talking about their verbal, and by 4 they're beginning to form concepts about how the world works well and truly. What might be the answer to the question to a 4-year-old, to a 6-year-old? Apropos of nothing, they just say to you, what is death?
Yeah, so what we might say, and also advocate for parents to say, is just to be honest and just give a bit of information saying death is usually something that happens when someone gets older, quite a bit older, and when that happens, their body stops working and their brain stops working, and that means that they have died and they don't come back. Now, obviously, if there's a cultural context, if they believe in afterlives and other things, that's when you can build on that, but I think that's the kind of final point on where we are at the moment on this earth. That's what happens. So
obviously people have their various spiritual beliefs, or they may want to, either out of genuine faith belief or out of a desire to sort of soften the impact of this, they may talk about, Nana's looking down on you from heaven.
Yeah.
But are you saying, for the child's sake, they need to understand physiologically that death is a thing?
Yes, and I think also to explain to them that heaven is not, if that is the case, heaven's not a place that we can go to. And that we cannot visit Nana at the moment, or whoever has died at the moment. And then obviously that kind of goes into more of that theological conversation,
which gets
about
more and more complex.
Yeah. But I think that it's like in tamariki that I've spoken to, that as early as 6, they kind of have this understanding that while I'm alive here, I can't see Nana, but Nana's watching over me. And they've been supported by stories that they've been told through their community, potential books that they've read as well. And those kind of help them understand that, okay, so Nana is, for my purpose of like talking about heaven, Nana is up there, and maybe when I get old and then I die, I will see Nana.
But you need to make that physical physicality clear. It occurs to me before we get into part 2 of this, which is helping children not with the concept but also with what it's going to feel like, right? But it occurs to me that sometimes their first experience might be a dead pet or even just finding a dead animal on the road. And is this often how the concept first begins? Yes,
absolutely. Or that they saw on the news that people died and they're like, what is that? What does that mean? Or, as we said, like a celebrity has died as well. And it is that kind of normalising of, yes, this animal was probably old or sick. And when that happens and they get very sick or they're very old, then they will die. And we might, if they do find an animal and you want to make it a bit of a process, you might bury the animal and kind of normalise that process as well.
It's not always older people who die, unfortunately.
No,
and how does that conversation happen when it's a young child at school or a family member who's young? Yeah,
absolutely. So when they do start to go into that school age, and obviously we do know that unfortunately that isn't always the case, that is kind of where those more specific conversations can happen, when they kind of have that understanding and you would just give that, that factual information to them. And obviously, when I'm saying factual, you're being empathetic and lovely, as any, caregivers usually know how to do anyway. I don't want to, leave that out. That's a really important part.
But you're using the right words.
Yes. So
the way you deliver it's one thing, but you've got to use easy to understand, clear words.
Yeah. And so, like, if, for example, it was someone younger who did, say, die from a cancer or die from something else, going into a bit of a discussion of this was a disease, this is what happened to them, and that meant that their body couldn't fight it anymore, and so they died. And then what you want to do after that is to come in with that reassurance of like, that's why we take you to the doctor and we get checked and we know that you're healthy and that you're okay and we're here to support and look after you, and we're going to make sure we're going to the doctor as well to look after us. But sometimes these things do happen, and
no number of visits to the doctor's going to,
No, unfortunately.
It's another thing you want to be sort of careful of, isn't it? It's, oh my God, I haven't gone to the doctor this week. Is something going to happen? Is it about explaining that sometimes, but not often, people can get sick or a bad accident can happen? Do you need to reassure, in a way, we're still talking theoretically, do you need to reassure that it doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it does, and we feel sad when it does?
Yeah, totally. And, I think also it was so important for parents to, validate those feelings and say how it's impacting them as well in a way that's appropriate, and saying, so sometimes this does happen, and then they can say things like, we wouldn't expect that this would be happening to you. You're nice and healthy, and we're going to be here to look after and support you, but sometimes this happens for some people. And as they start to kind of understand what death is, then those conversations will hopefully get a bit easier, and they'll understand, okay, by like 6 to 8, okay, this person had this and this is why.
Let's talk about that. More information perhaps needed as children age, and perhaps primary school age into early intermediate into high school. They may want to know more about what's happened, what's caused a death, yeah?
Yes, so generally from obviously about starting school, I'd say 6 and over, they'll want to have a bit more of an understanding of what happened, and they might ask a lot, and it's up to the parent to see how ready they are for that conversation as well.
What's a heart attack?
Yeah. And so with heart attack is a great example. You could say heart attack, but that can sound really scary. It sounds like a heart is attacking someone, and so you just say what that means is that their heart had something wrong with it, and so their heart, you don't necessarily need to go into the full physiology of it, but their heart ended up not working. And so when the heart stops working, the body stops working, the brain stops working, and they died. And then you can explain a bit about, heart attacks as a thing that generally happens to a heart that's not feeling healthy. And, you could do like a really sweet activity with them. You go, oh, like I'm going to listen, and I can hear your heart, and you've got a nice healthy heart, and do you want to hear my heart? And do those kinds of things to reassure them. Constant reassurance is so lovely. We don't want to say, no, this will not happen. or this will not happen to someone you know, because that concrete language is something they'll hold on to, and that can be, we can't promise the future. We aren't future seers, unfortunately, but...
All right, let's talk about the second aspect of this, where it is a loved one, and they not only do they need to understand what has happened to a grandparent who's sick, because we might be talking about, that's actually a point worth touching on. At what point are you talking about the fact that a beloved grandparent is sick and then saying that they're going to die? How do you prepare a child for that, and how do you have that conversation, and when?
Yeah, I think that there's no real right time. I know there's a lot of parents who are worried about getting it wrong, and in our experience, as long as you're being honest and answering questions and giving pretty concrete answers, but not necessarily over explaining everything medically, that's not as necessary. You can do that whenever you're feeling ready to, and that conversation can be discussing what is happening for them.
It may be as that parent visibly becomes more unwell, or perhaps less responsive because of drug treatments or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you can give a little bit more information, not only about what's happening to them, but that at some point Gran will die. And again, use the word. You're big on using that word.
I am. If they have a shared understanding in the family that passed away means passed away, that means died, I'm okay with that, and obviously we want to be using the language that the children are using. I caution against not using the concrete language, because at that younger age, even up to potentially 8 or 9, they have quite magical thinking and can think, well, passed away means maybe they've gone somewhere else, or they are lost means that we need to find them. So getting a really clear concept of what dies is just going to help with that. And also with anticipated grief as well, it's great to talk about that process and let them know that this has nothing to do with them and what they're doing.
Now, explain a little bit more about that. This is where sometimes if we use wording that we're hoping will be, gentler on them, actually their imaginations can interpret things wrongly. Can you explain? Yeah,
totally. So what we tend to notice is that at the younger age of development, they are kind of interpreting things through themselves. So they're introspective, they're coming through themselves and then applying that to the world. And when they do that, they can take these concepts and then run with their imagination and come up with ideas. And so, like going for a long sleep, they are going to imagine, well, I miss this person, and if they're asleep, I might wake them up. And maybe they've seen movies where characters like Sleeping Beauty have gone to sleep, and all we need to do is do the right things and they'll wake up. And so we just want to make sure that we're being really clear with them about what death is, so that they don't, A, think that it's reversible, or B, start to blame themselves, because there have been children who have thought, well, they've gone for a long sleep. Is it because they don't want to talk to me because I was mean last week to them? And we don't want them to take any blame for themselves, and we want to reassure them as well.
Where they have witnessed what's happened, someone becomes suddenly ill in front of them, an accident, goodness me, but where whatever has caused the death or been the start of what is to become a death has happened in front of them. This is challenging. How do you talk that through, and what else are you dealing with by means of their natural response?
Yeah, with any traumatic loss, it is really tricky, because they're going to be experiencing or witnessing things that are potentially going to be complicating that grief process.
They may be at a distance. There may be something happening in this room, and there's an ambulance arriving, and everyone's upset and running around.
Yeah.
So how do you debrief that with them?
Yeah, so what I would say is that if it's a situation like that, you would try to check in with their safety first and how they're doing in the moment, and then give them a very pragmatic overview in an age-appropriate way about what's gone on. The one thing we need to be careful about is that if it was a traumatic loss, say they saw something quite intense, is we don't want to necessarily go probing deeply into that topic, because we're at risk of re-traumatizing them, and that's kind of where some specialist help might be. Professional help might be.
Say a child saw an accident. Goodness, I saw one, fortunately not fatal, just the other day when a bus hit someone. That gave me a real working over, and that person seemed to be fine. Well, they seem to be fine. Police were there straight away and everything. They seem to be certainly conscious, but something like that for a child to see, and particularly if it were to end up as a fatality, like that, or especially if it was someone they knew and loved, that's going to need some professional assistance to debrief best, yeah?
Yeah, I would say most of the times. However, if they've got like really amazing community support around them and a lot of those lovely protective factors, it might not necessarily need to go to that point. And if we're careful just about, asking how they're doing and letting them, talk about how they're feeling in the moment, talking about the person as well, if they did know them, about what they remember, then that's...
How do you talk about grief to younger children again?
Mm-hmm.
Because they may not actually in the moment be feeling it quite the way you are, because you know what's coming, you're an adult. So a child's lost someone, but they're still actually registering what, here I am doing it. A child has lost someone, say a grandparent or a family member. It might be an older aunt or something. So they're trying to process what that even means, but they may not yet feel, and may at a later point feel, grief. How do you even talk through what grief feels like and how we sit with grief?
Yeah, and I think that, children are very much able to go between grief states and like what we call restoration states. So they'll go from being really upset to play.
In the moment.
Moment by moment. And they also may be exhibiting behaviours that we might not recognise as grief. So like behavioural problems or sometimes anger or other things that we might not necessarily directly think of as grief, and it could be delayed as well. So what we would do is just make sure that we're explaining the situation and then offering that space for them to come talk to us. But
also what feelings are. Yeah. It's a conversation for big feelings, isn't it?
Absolutely. And to not say that you should be feeling this way or this way, but just saying that, this happens and, people do get sad or maybe they get angry and they might want to talk to people about it, and we're here if you want to come have a conversation.
With older adolescents and teenagers, again, where their understanding of what's happened might be at a superior level, but their understanding of what's happening to their emotions might be something quite else. What should people expect over time?
Yeah, I would expect, as we say, everyone's unique, but there are common things that are likely to happen. And one of those things would generally be that they're probably going to be a bit cautious about talking about it in social settings, because there's a social stigma attached to the idea of having someone close to you die, and people are uncomfortable talking about it. And so validating that might be something going on for them, and like letting them know that it's okay, and maybe seeing if people around are able to support in those conversations. We would expect potentially that it might have some added very strong emotions that do pop up, or maybe they're withdrawing more. So if they're withdrawing more, that's that gentle invitation to talk. We don't want to necessarily pressure them, but we want them to know that there are people that can talk to them.
Some questions I have for you. Some of it we've possibly covered off. When a parent is visibly ill with a terminal condition, at what point should you tell young children around the age of 10? Do you wait until very near the end of life, or should you tell them early on?
I think that it is case by case about how comfortable the support system is. If they are willing to have that conversation earlier, I think that there is no harm in doing that, as long as it's, again, that clear language of, we're going to make memories. And
a 10-year-old's, with a parent in particular, a 10-year-old is getting on age-wise, and I'm curious for your opinion on this, but the ability to grieve while a loved one is still with you can have benefits, right? It's preparing while you still have the comfort of having them with you.
Yeah, there is that, but it doesn't necessarily change the intensity of the bereavement afterwards. It can mean that now they know strategies and ways of coping and who they can talk to, those social supports, and so those feel stronger, so their grief journey is easier. But an anticipated loss is a different type of loss to the actual grief loss, so that they'll have to do both. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily always make it
The
easier.
other thing to be wary of is that by that age, again, they're at that age where you forget they're actually knowing and noticing more than they're knowing and noticing.
Yeah, totally.
It's a wonderful novel that got written recently, actually, about just this, that transition where you still think kids aren't listening, but boy, they are. So you want to be aware of that, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say that if the whānau's comfortable to have that conversation, that they can do that earlier, because they're probably going to be noticing a lot of those emotions going on for the parents and picking up on things, and it's good for them to know that it's not because of them and that there's something going on that's actually quite serious.
Is it not better to be clear that death is what happens to everyone at different times, and that also includes them also making it normal, rather than, I think was talking with very young children, that it happens to old people mostly?
Yeah, I think that was the example that we kind of use in our Matika group, because there is a propensity that, like, children will get health anxiety around death if they start to, worry that, I'm going to die soon. But I think that, as they kind of get into that older at 6 and on, that it is okay. And if there is an experience where it is a younger person, then that's where you would come in and just be very clear about, hey, actually, this does happen to everyone at some point. We would expect this to be when you are older, but sometimes
statistically it is, isn't it? Yeah, okay. This breaks my heart. As a funeral celebrant, I hear all manner of explanations adults give children about grief. Nana is having a very long sleep, or baby was born sleeping. I don't even want to think about the last one. How on earth do you talk to a child about that in your own grief?
Yeah, and I think, it's in your own grief especially, trying to lean on your supports to help you as a parent, really getting people in to help with the practical needs. And then, the sleeping thing, if that is what they have said, we don't even necessarily want to directly challenge a whānau if that's the language they're using. And so maybe it would be just, inviting them to, what do you understand about what's happened to baby,
and
or
then
what's
bring
happened
in more
to
detail.
Yeah, with obviously the whānau's consent.
Understood.
As a counsellor, I'm not going to want to go in and be like, your parents said the wrong thing, because there is no really wrong way.
But your point is, in this most heartbreaking of situations, you still need the child to understand the meaning. It
would be good too, because we just really don't want them to go down this path of trying to figure it out for themselves.
Another here. Could you ask about the approach for talking about grief? Is it different it is different for neurodivergent children, I think is the sentence. I have a son who has mild high-functioning autism and struggles to communicate his emotions and to know where he is at with difficult subjects as discussed. He's elderly grandparent, so I believe this will be something I'll have to tackle in the near future. Yeah,
and I'll say that I'm not necessarily an expert on specifically neurodiverse grief, but I would say that the ability to communicate things clearly with that concrete language, I believe, will still be useful. And then you'd want to make sure that that they have space and time and know they can come talk to you and ask clarifying questions. I think as long as you're kind of doing that, I think that those approaches will work well. And grief is a natural process we do go through. Some people need a bit more support with it than others, but it is a journey that we tend to be actually quite good as humans is doing. So.
One observation here, this has just come from some of the feedbacks that have come in. When I was 6, my beloved grandfather died. We were told he'd died, but were deemed too young to go to the funeral. I now know I felt a deep searing grief, but didn't get closure, support or understanding. Whether it's the funeral, that's part of the shared grieving process. Is there ever too young for children to go to?
I wouldn't say so. It's really up to how well the whānau can manage. Can the parents bring them, and are they okay with that potential emotional load on the day of answering questions? But I've been to funerals in Tangi where there's been 2-year-olds there, and they've made some comments about granddad going in the ground, and that's okay, and that they're kind of getting first-hand account of that process, and they're learning what that means. And they're seeing that everyone else is sad, and that might validate that they're feeling sad too. So it's okay. If they can't be there, then that's okay as well.
Very good. Skylight, of course, has resources available, I'm sure, if people are dealing, particularly if they're dealing with really complex situations here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got resources we can send out across the country, and also our counselling services. But people are more than welcome to reach out, and if they want anything clarified, I'm sure that we can follow up with them.
Thank you very much, Benjamin Jensen, who is a grief counsellor with Skylight Trust.